So what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and it's a style sheet language used to customize a document written in HTML or XML. Cascading means the order of the style, means the later rules can override the earlier ones. Okay, so we have here an example of two buttons. The one on the left side is made only with HTML, and the one on the right side, it has HTML and CSS. So you can see it has also a little transition when we hover on it. The colors changed. So this is the difference between using only HTML or HTML plus CSS. Alright, so let's talk about the syntax. So this is a simple CSS rule that has a selector of P and a declaration of a font size 16 pixels. For the syntax, we add the selector element, in this case is P. After we add curly brackets, our property, colon, value, and semicolon at the end. We can have multiple selectors and multiple declarations in the same CSS rule. Alright, so this is the file that I created for my buttons. I have created here internal CSS to the HTML file. So to add internal CSS, what we do is inside the head tag of the HTML, we add the style tag, and inside we add the CSS. So this is called internal CSS. The other way to apply a style is with the inline CSS code. That means I can add it inside my tag. Let's say I want to change the color of this button for black. So then, inside my opening tag, and before greater than, right here, I add a style, and I add the property, in this case is color, and the value black. Then the CSS code will apply. So this is the inline CSS code. So let me remove this one from here, and this one change it to white. And let me add a comment. Inline CSS, and here internal CSS. So to add a comment inside CSS, we use in the beginning forward slash asterisk, and at the end asterisk and forward slash. Alright, and the third way to add CSS to our HTML file is to do it by creating an external CSS sheet. So I press Ctrl N and Ctrl S to save a new file, and we usually call it a style CSS. You can call it any name that you want, but always the extension has to be CSS. We save it. Let me split the screen. And by the way, I have chosen autosave, so I don't need to save on my changes on my code editor. I just reload the browser. Okay, so let's add some margin to the buttons. So we add here button and a margin of 10 pixels. If I reload, nothing is going to change, and this is because I always have to link my style sheet to my HTML in order to apply the code. So I added inside my head tag, and usually I add it before the title. So I add link, and by default you can see that it has a style sheet, right? And here inside href with dot and / I can find all the files that I have inside my folder. So I hit style CSS, and then it will apply my CSS code. So let me add here the comment of external CSS. So there you have the 3 ways to apply CSS to the HTML file. We have inline CSS that is inside the tag, internal CSS, which is inside the head tag, inside the style tag, and external CSS that is an external CSS sheet. Alright, so I wanted to explain about the cascading style. So let's say that we have here again the same exact CSS rule, but with different colors. So let me add here a pink and a blue. Right? You can see that it's pointing to the bottom, the second bottom, and when we hover on it, right? So the one that it will apply is the latest one, right? So even if we have this 3, 4, 5 times, it will apply the latest one. So if we reload, when we hover, you can see the colors are pink and blue, right? Because this is the latest code that we have for this selector, right? So that's what cascading style means. So the first type of selector we have is the asterisk. So this is an universal selector, and it applies the declaration to all elements of our HTML file, all right? So in this case, it's applying a margin and a padding and a font size for all of the tags that we have inside the HTML. We have here also the type selector, which is by adding the name of the tag, in this case p tag, right? And we tend to apply a color of gray for all of them. After we have the class selectors, which is the one that we added dot before the name of the class. So you can see here the class is highlight. So then we add here dot and highlight, and after our declaration, so we put here a background turquoise. Then we have the attribute selector, the ID selector, and we use the pound key before the name of the tag for this type of selector. So here we have the h1 tag with the ID of header. So in this case, we add pound key and header. We added a font size of 16 pixels. So you can see here that is bigger than the rest. Then we have the attribute selector. For this case, we use after the name of the tag, square brackets, and then we add the attribute, and then the type of attribute. On this case, text, right? So we have here an input with the type text, such as this one, and we added a border orange, right? So you can see the border is orange here. Then we have the pseudo-class, and for that we use colon after the name of the tag. So one of the most used is the hover pseudo-class. So if we hover on this text, you can see the change the color for pink. Alright, so then we have the pseudo-element. For that we use double colon, right? And on this case, the pseudo-element that we're using is after. And we're saying that after add the content of dot. So you can see for all of our paragraph elements, we have a dot at the end. And we are not adding it inside the tag, but here in the declaration, right? Now we have the descendant selector. So in this case, div is the parent and p is the child, right? So then only for the ones that have a div as a parent and a p as a child, then add the color green. In this case, only this paragraph. After we have the child selector, for this we use greater than. Now the parent, greater than, and the children. So we're using UL and the children are LI. This is to create a list, right? So we have the list here. And we are a declaration of list style type none. Now we have the adjacent sibling selector. And for that we use a plus. So we have the name of the tag h2 plus, which is p, and we are a margin top of 30 pixels, right? We have also a general sibling selector, and for that we use a tilde, and you can see the color declaration is color red, so you can see it here. And you can see it's applying only for these two paragraphs because these are the siblings of the h2, right? And at the end we have the group selector, such as when we have multiple selectors with the same declaration, and for that we separate them by comma. So we have the most common, such as hover. In this case, when I hover on this element, it changes the color and the text decoration, correct? We also have the focus one. On this case, we apply focus for input. So if I click on it, you can see that the border changes, right? And it can be similar to active, but you will see the difference now. So for this bottom that we apply the pseudo-class active, when I click on it, it changes the background color to dark blue, right? But when I release the mouse, it will go to the initial background color. So focus and active are different pseudo-classes. One is only when I click on it, and focus it stays after it's clicked, you see? Alright, now we have the visited one that we use for links. So after I click on the link, it will change the color. So you can see that it changed both colors because both are links and both have been visited. Now we start with the parents and children pseudo classes. We have here first child. So we want to add this declaration for the first child of the UL list and the tag LI, right? So in this case will be this element. That is the first child of the parent UL. We also have the pseudo-class last child. We can use the pseudo-class nth child to identify any specific child. In this case, we want only the odds to have a background color of light gray, so you can see the second one of each list having the background color light gray. We also have the pseudo-class nth of type, and inside we can add the number of the position of the children. So we choose p nth of type 3. So here is this third one, right? And this is the one that has the italic font style. And we can make exceptions with not pseudo-class. We say for the p tag with the class special that we put inside parentheses, don't apply the color gray. So then you see that only for the one that has the class special is not applying the color gray, but it's applying for the other ones, right? Alright, the first one is the pseudo element before that we use when we want to add some declarations before our element, on this case the p tag. Alright, so we're saying here add the content prefix that is here, add a font weight of bold and a color blue. And we have a similar one such as the after, but it's the opposite, that is after the element. And we want to add the content suffix such as here color red and font weight bold, right? Next we have the first line. So we're applying a font size and font weight properties to the first line of our paragraph. So you can see the difference between the first line and the second one, right? Next we have first letter. So you can see that only the P has a different font size, color, and font weight, right? Because we choose the pseudo element first letter. Now we have selection. So if I select any part of my content, then it's going to change the background and the color, right? I can add a different color so you can see the difference. See the colors change as well. And at the end we have the placeholder pseudo element, and for that we are using the element input. So you can see the placeholder has a color of blue and a font style italic. Okay, so let me explain first the box model. So a box model represents the structure of a box in CSS. So every element is a rectangular box that contains the following parts. So we have a content, which is the innermost part where the text and images appear. I'm going to open my code editor. So I have here the HTML with an internal CSS. So in this case, the content will be the P tag and the UL list. I added a background color beige so you can see the difference between the content and the rest. We also have the padding, which is the space between the content and the border. The padding increases the size of the box, so all what is around the content is the padding, alright? So we have here a padding of 20 pixels. If I remove this padding, you will see that the box will get smaller. So you see some spaces, they are by default added. So there's some padding between them, but on the sides, there's no padding, right? So if we want to add a padding between the border of the box and the content, then we add padding, the padding property inside, in this case, the box, right? So when we add 20 pixels as a value, we are adding 20 pixels. And let me just shrink it here. We are adding the padding for all sides of the box. If we want only for one side, on this case only for the top, let's say only for the top, then we have here padding top, or if we want the left, padding left, bottom, right, and so on. So if I want to add different paddings for all sides, then I start with the top, after the right, bottom, and left, just like the clock hands. So in this case, I add maybe 10 on the top, 25 on the right, 5 bottom, and let's say 3 on the left. So you can see we have here 10, 25, 5, and 3. Alright, and the same works for the margin as well. You can do exactly the same. If we want to add a padding on top and bottom the same, and the right and left the same, then we only add 2, right? The first for the top and bottom, the second for right and left. Let me adjust it so you can see the difference. And then it will apply a different for both parts. Alright, so next we have the border, which is this one. We added a border of 2 pixels, solid and black. We always start with the width of the border, the style, and after the color, alright? That is the order that we have to apply, that we need to apply a border to the box. So a border will always go inside the box. And at the end we have also margin, which is the outermost space that separates the element, in this case the box, from other elements. So we have applied here a margin of 30 pixels for the top and bottom, and on right and left 10 pixels, alright? So we have margin outside the element, padding inside the element, border that is between the margin and the padding, and the content where we add all the text and images. Okay, so now let's explain box sizing. All right, so we have here, let me shrink this. We have here a box, right, I create with a margin of 20, top and bottom, and on the side 0, and a padding inside of 10 pixels. I have a border and a background color of white, which I can just remove from here. It won't make a difference. And I created two boxes. One I call it content box and border box. All right. For the content box and border box, you can see that we have the same properties, right? You have margin bottom, background color, and so on. All of them both have the same properties and values. However, the difference is the box sizing. So for the first one, we have content box, and for the second one, border box. All right, so by default, on CSS, if you don't add this property and value, by default is going to be the box sizing content box. And let's explain what is content box. That means the width and the height apply to the content only, right? On this case, 200 pixels, and the height is the default height, you know, till the text finishes, which is here. And the padding and border are added to this width and height, increasing the total size of the element. So the box that we made here, by default, was a content box as well, right? Because you can see that it increased the size after we added the border and the padding, right? And the second one is the border box. So for this one, the width and height include content, padding, and border. Which is the opposite, right? That ensures that the total size is what you expect, regardless of the padding or border size. So that is the difference between content box and border box. Alright, now let's check the display properties. We created again a box with a margin and padding, the same as the prior box. And we have here, we created 4 divs. And they have different type of values for the property display, right? So for the first one, we added display block. So block element takes up the full width available and it starts on a new line. Examples include div and p. So you can see that it takes the entire width available and it goes outside of our box, right? Now we have the inline value. So for display inline, an inline element takes up only as much width as necessary and does not start a new line. So examples include a span and a. Now we have the inline block that is similar to inline elements but can have width and height set. In this case, we add a width of 150. And it does not start a new line. And at the end, we have display none, that it basically removes the element. All right, so you cannot see it because we choose display none. So what is Flexbox? So basically, Flexbox layout provides great control over the alignment, spacing, and distribution of items within a container. Flex container is the parent, and flex items are the child elements. Alright, so we have flex container properties as display flex, flex direction, justify content, align items, and flex wrap. And also we have flex item properties like flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, align self, and order. Alright, so I have here on the right my HTML file, and it has some internal CSS. And on the right I have the file open on the browser. I've created a couple of containers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 container boxes, and I have added inside flex items. So you can see that each div has the class flex container with a different justified content value. So the first one is flex star, second center, a space between, the other is a space around, and a space evenly. And it also has different values for the property align items. So I have flex star, align center, align flex n, baseline, and stretch. All right. So for the flex container, I just add the property display and the value flex for all of the boxes, and I add the same height, 200 pixels, a margin bottom of 20 pixels, and a border of 2 pixels solid and this dark gray. And for the flex items, I added a background color, this green color, a padding of 20, and a margin of 10 pixels. All right. I also added a different font family for the entire body. Let me align to the left by pressing Ctrl A and Shift Tab. So for the first flex container, I added a justified content value of flex star. Therefore, the content or the 3 items will go to the left side of the box. All right. And I also add the align items flex star. That means it will go to the top. So if I remove this align items, you can see it will go all the way till the bottom, right? So if I want them to be only on the top right, then I add top left, I add justify content flex star, and align items flex star. All right, for the second box that we have justify content center and align item center, as you can see, is in the middle of the box. This is one of the most used for us to center any content in the center of the box horizontally and vertically. So if I just add justified content center without aligning, you can see that it will have the same effect as the first one. It will stretch all the way till the bottom, right? The third one is justified content space between. So space between will locate the items with evenly a space in between and no space on the side of the box. All right. And the line items flex end, it will locate them at the bottom. And now the justify content space around, it will add a space on the side of my items. So you see on the right and on the left part of my box, it will have some space, right? So if we expand our window, you can see here the space, right? And the baseline will add them at the top. And at the end, we have the justified content space evenly. So you can tell it placed it exactly in the middle, so the space in between are exactly the same width, right? And we choose align items stretch. That's why it stretch all the way from the bottom, from the top until the bottom, right? All right, guys, so that's how you can use the display flex property and value. And that's how you use the justified content property, all the options, and also the align items property. All right, so let's talk about positioning. Position property in CSS specifies how an element is positioned in the document. It controls the layout behavior and placement of an element. Okay, so I have my HTML file to explain the property position. I've created 5 boxes. Each of them have the different position values. So I have static, relative, sticky, absolute, and fixed. All of them have a padding of 20, a margin of 20, and a width of 600. And I added for my file a height of 1300 pixels. And I added just a different background color for each. So we have inside the explanation. So we're going to start with the static. The static positioning, default value. Elements are positioned according to the normal document flow. No special positioning. No special positioning. The top right, bottom, and left properties have no effect. So you can see I added a top 10, but there's nothing added. So if I remove it, nothing is gonna change, right? So this is the default position. So if I don't have positioning static, you see it will still remain there. And this is because this is the default position. All right, I have it here as the first one. Now the second one is relative positioning. This one is relative to itself. An element is positioned relative to its normal position. So here we have it as the second one, second box, right? Offset with top, right, bottom, left. These properties adjust the element's position, but space is still reserved in the layout. So for this one, I added a top 5 and is applying instead of the static that it didn't, right? So if I remove it, you will see the 5 pixels is gone. Now, inside the HTML, you notice that the third one is the absolute box, but here I have it as the fourth box, right? So I wanted the absolute position to go after the sticky position. So in this case, I added a top of 350, as you can see. So if I remove the absolute, by default will go after the relative, but the sticky will go on top, right? So let's see how the absolute box work. The absolute position. Absolute positioning, so it's removed from normal flow. The element is positioned relative to its nearest position ancestor, not static. Precise control. You can use top, right, bottom, left to position the element precisely, and that's exactly what I did here. And you would say, why did I add so much top, right? And this is because it counts the top from here as the difference of the relative that it counts the top after the first one, right? So if I added top 0, it won't go here, it will go all the way up. You can see it, right? So you can position it exactly where you want by using top, right, left, and bottom. But if I remove it, by default, it will go after the nearest, such as in this case, relative, right? But if you have it in a sticky position after, it will go under the sticky position. Unless we use the index that I'm going to explain later on, right? Okay. So then I have after my sticky position. So a sticky position, it is a hybrid of relative and fixed. The element is positioned based on the user's scroll position. All right. So if I scroll down, you will see that all these three, you will see like all of them except for the fixed stay in the same position, right? So then since I didn't add what is the initial position of the sticky, if I scroll down, it will add as the other three, right? As relative. But if I add here top 0, right? Then I'm positioning here when I scroll down. So you'll see it acts normal, normal, normal. And when it reaches, right, top 0, then it stays in the same position. So that's what it says. It is a hybrid between relative and fixed. It acts like relative until it reaches a defined threshold, then behaves like fixed. And at the end, we have the fixed one that you can see was similar to the sticky, except for it acts fixed since the beginning, from the beginning. So fixed positioning relative to the viewport. The element is positioned relative to the browser window, it stays in place, and it does not move when the page is scrolled. So since the beginning, from the beginning, you can see that it always stays in the same position. All right, let's continue with z-index. So it is a property in CSS that controls the stacking order of elements that overlap. It determines which elements or element appears on top when elements are positioned with absolute, relative, fixed, or sticky and overlap each other. So z-index is very simple to explain. I just added 3 boxes here. They have different colors. They have different top and left, right? For this one, I added 50-50 top and left, second 100 top and left, and the blue one 150 and 150. For all of them, I added a width and height of 200 pixels, and important, I added position absolute, so we can specify where in the entire HTML we want exactly our boxes to be. I added just a color white and a text align center for my text. Alright, so let's start with the first box. So you can see it does not have any z-index. This is because by default the z-index will be 1. Alright, so if I added 1 here, it won't make a difference. I think I added a different color. Okay, so by default all of our elements are z-index 1. Okay, so for the second one we have a z-index 2. That means it will go on top of the 1. You can see it, right? And for the third box, we are a z-index of 3. Therefore, it will go on top of the first one and the second one. So let's say that we change our opinion and now we want the blue one to be actually under the red one, right? So then we apply -1. So let's see. Apply here -1, right? And to see the effect, let's apply only 10 to top and left. So then you see, right, that we have here now our third box under the first one. So we can do that by adding -2, -3, -4 case we have more boxes. So this is how z-index work. It adjusts the stack of our elements depending on the value of our z-index. Float property. CSS float is a property used to position an element to the left or right of its container, allowing text and inline elements to wrap around it. Let's see the key points for the float and clear property. So we have left, right, none, clearing floats, and layout impact. Alright, so for that we are going to open our HTML file where we can see the examples for the float and clear property. Alright guys, so this is the HTML file. Alright, so as you can see we have 4 boxes. Right, so each box has a width of 200 pixels, padding 20 pixels, margin bottom 10, color white, and a text align center. Alright, they are inside this parent element called container that has 600 pixels, margin top and bottom 0, and on the sides it's auto. It has a border of 1px solid, and this is a light gray, and a padding of 20 pixels. We also added a different font family for this HTML file. All of the boxes have different background colors and different values for the property float, okay? Alright, so for the box 1, we have the property float left, alright? So that's why it's on the top right of the container. The second one we have float right, then it's going to be positioned on the top right of the container. The third box, we added the float left again, so then it will go below the first one and also floating on the left side of the container. And for the last one, we added clear both. That means to clear the floating values that we had before. But because we have 200 here, right? Then it goes still here. So if we remove this width, you can see that the first box and the third box will go both to the left, right? And only the box 2 will go to the right. And since we added here clear both, that means left and right, it will occupy the entire width of the container, okay? That means it's not applying any float values that we added before. Therefore, if we remove also the float of the other ones, then each of them will have the width of the parents, which is 600 pixels, and it will go one below the other one. The last layout technique that we have is the grids, which is one of the most important ones. So what is grid? Basically a layout system that allows us to create rows and columns within a container. And the key points are the grid container, grid items, grid lines, grid areas, and auto placement. Alright guys, for this case I'm going to start almost from scratch so you can understand more about grid containers, because it can be a little confusing in the beginning. So what I did was I created a container called a grid container, and I added a display grid. I added a background color for the entire container. So far you cannot see it because the grid items takes the entire space. So I added the background color for the grid items, which is the purple one. I added 20 pixels for the text, around the text, right? I call each of them from 1 till 9. Item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. And each of them have the class grid item. And as well, I added a class of item and the number for each. So if I want to apply any specific property and value, then I just add this part of the class inside my CSS and add my declarations inside. Alright, so let's add first of all a gap for each grid item. So I add inside grid container, that is the parent, a gap of 10 pixels. Okay, so then you can see the background color of the grid container. And let's say I want to create 4 columns for this grid container. So then I add here below grid template columns, right? And I add how many fractions to take of the container here. So if I want each of them to have 1 fraction, then I can do this, right? And I'll create 4 columns for my container. But if I want to simplify this value, what I do is I use repeat, right? And then I add the number of the columns, comma, and how many they're gonna take, how many fractions for the total. So then you can see that it will accomplish the same goal. Alright, so let's continue with the grid template rows. For grid template rows, I can apply the height for each of the containers. So let's say I want the height for the first row to be 100 pixels. The second one 100 pixels as well, but the last one I want it to be 50 pixels, the last row. So it only applies for the item 9, right? So you can see that the height applies for each row, the entire, all of the items of that row. If I want the first one to be 200, right? So then I adjust it here, and you can see it will take the double. I'm going to leave it like that for now. So that you can see how easy it is to create a grid container, right? And applying the height and the width that you want to for each of them. Well, now let's see what we can do if we want to apply it in a specific height and width for, let's say, the item 1, right? So then I add the name of my class, item 1. And I add the property grid row. And I want it to start from the first one, second one, till the end, right? So then I apply second or 2 slash and 4. So when I reload, you can see it takes from the second one, which is this one, till the 4th. And this is because it counts the top of the container as the first one. So if we want to understand more, we can add a padding here, right, to our container of 10 pixels, or let's say 5 pixels, right? So then this is the first grid or grid line. This is the second, this will be the third, and this will be the 4th, okay? So if I say start from the second one, so then start from here, and it finishes till here, which is the 4th grid line, correct? So remember, grid lines is the space between the items, between the containers. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. In this case, from second till 4th. And I can do the same for the columns. So let's say I want to apply it to span my item 2, the grid column, right? In this case, this one. But I want it to start it from the first grid line. So that means from here. So I add 1, and I want it to go to the end. So then I add a slash 4. Right? So I can see that it starts from my first grid line, and it takes all the space till the 4th grid line. So 1, 2, 3, and 4th. Okay, so let's start with some fundamentals about colors. So let's explore the hex codes. So the hex color codes are a way to represent colors in web design and digital graphics. Hex stands for hexadecimal, which is a base 16 numbering system. The system uses 16 symbols, the numbers 0 to 9, and the letters A to F. So the first 2 digits are red intensity, the middle ones green intensity, and the last one blue intensity. Right, so now RGB. RGB stands for red, green, blue. It's a color model that is one of the most used for representing colors in digital screens. Combining red, green, and blue in various intensities, we can create a big range of other colors. So RGB values range from 0 to 255 for each color component. And the combination of these 3 at full intensity, 255, 255, 255, produces white. And the absence, 000, it's black. Now let's check HSL. That stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. Hue represents the color itself and is given as a degree on the color wheel. So 0 is red, 120 is green, and 240 is blue. Now for the saturation, this one is the one who indicates the intensity or purity of the color. So 0%, from 0% to 100%. And lightness defines how light or dark the color is, also from 0 to 100%. Okay guys, so I have created here an HTML file that has internal CSS, and inside my body tag I created different boxes for the different type of color values, and inside there is an explanation for each, and of course the name as well. As you can see, all of them have the class example. All right, and inside example we added a border, a padding, a margin bottom, a background color, and a color for the font. We also added a color and a margin top for the H2 tag, the heading, and for the body I just added the font family, Arial, line height, margin, and background color. Alright, so our first box has the background color of coral. This is a name color, right? So basically the value is the name of the color, so we can add red, blue, white, gray, and so on. Alright, so these are named colors. Now for the second one, we are using for the background color a hex color. I explained before what is a hex color. Now for the third box, we have an RGB color that is a green color. So for RGB, we add RGB, and inside parentheses, we add the three colors separated by a comma. So the red, green, and blue. And the next one, the RGBA, is basically an RGB color that has a 0.8 of transparency. So transparency is basically this bar that is here. So if you want to add some transparency, then you add a comma at the end of the RGB color and add the transparency that you want. All right. So let's say I want to adjust my transparency. I just go here, I hover on the RGB color, and I just adjust it here. And as you can see, the last number is changing, right? Because I changed the transparency. You can also hover on this color and do the same, right? So then you transform the RGB into an RGBA. Let me just go back. And you can do transparency also for this color as well. All right, so for this box, we added an HSL color, background color. So you see that we added here the hue, the saturation, and the lightness. Okay, so if I remove this to 0, then it's going to turn gray my background color, because I removed the saturation, right? If I added, let's say 20%, then it's going to have 20% of saturation, and so on. And for my lightness, if I add it to 0, if I remove it and add 0, then it's going to be completely black, right? Because it doesn't have lightness at all. And for the last one, we added a background color with a value of HSLA. So basically this is similar to RGBA. We just added a transparency for this color of 0.5. Alright guys, so this is how we can add different type of values for the property background color, but as well we can use it with colors as well. So if I remove it from here, right, then the color will apply to my text instead of my element. I also want to explain that, for example, if we hover on any of the values and we want to change it, let's say for a lighter coral or a darker one, right, for a different shade, then we can just hover on the color and just drag this circle around till we find the color that we want. And as you can see, it's turning into an RGB, right? But if we want also to just change the color for, let's say, green or yellow, then we can drag this bar here till we find the color that we want. Okay guys, so I have created also boxes for to explain each of the gradients. So all of them have the class gradient box, and also inside the class the name of the property. And we have the internal CSS added for my body font family, margin padding, and background color. For my container, I added display grid template columns, and I added a gap for my boxes. So each box has a height of 150 for the radius of 10 pixels. You can see the corners are round. Color, display flex, justified, content center, align, item sentence, font, weight, text align, and padding. Alright guys, so for the first linear gradient, we added the property background, and after linear gradient, and inside the parentheses we add the two colors that we want to add. And before, you can see that we added the direction, right? So we're saying add the colors from top to bottom. So instead of adding from top to bottom, we just add to bottom. So you can see that this color is on top and the second one is at the bottom. All right, very simple. Now we move on with the second one. So for this one, we added the direction in degrees. So we added 45 degrees for our first color, right? So notice that this can be a little tricky, because if I remove the degrees, right, you can tell the first one is on the top and the second one is at the bottom, right? However, if I add 0 degrees here, you can see that the colors are going to switch, right? Then we have the second one on the top and the purple one at the bottom, right? So if I add here 45, then you can see that my second color moves on the right, correct? So we can just adjust here the direction of the color by adding the degrees first. Okay, so the third box is using instead radial gradient. Okay, so radial basically is round. And let me choose again a darker color so you can see a difference. Okay, so instead of being linear, it goes radiant, right? So if I remove the circle, right, and you can see it's more like an oval. It's not like an entire circle, right? So that's why if we wanted to add the first color as a circle, we have to add circle before adding the colors, okay? Then we have this box that we added the option radial gradient as well. But instead of circle, inside the parentheses, we chose ellipse. So you can see it's more like flat, the circle, right? So that's another option for your gradients as well. We also have next the conic gradient that split the colors, right? And after blend them at the bottom. Okay. Then we have this one, the conic gradient stops. And for this one, instead of 2 colors, we added 3 colors, right? And you can see have the cone shape, right? So let me just change it for, let's say, this color so we can see better the difference. The first color on the right, the second at the bottom, and the third on the left side. All right, so if we wanted to make it more as a cone, as I said as before, then we can add just the same color for the left side. Okay, and we have repeating linear gradient. I added 45 degrees, then is diagonal. I added the 2 colors, but also the width in pixels. So let me just make it darker here, and the second one here maybe lighter. Okay, all the colors blended diagonal, right? This is not a common gradient, but it is important to know about it. As you can see, you can add here the pixels for each. If I add here 30 pixels, then this color is going to be thicker, right? And the same for the others as well. All right, so then we have the repeating radial gradient instead of linear. So and I added also circle before the colors, and I just add the percentage that I want for my second color. In this case, I added 15%. And for the third color, I added 30%. So you can just play with the percentage and then choose the width of the radials, right? We can also add multicolor linear gradients. As I did here, I added 3 colors, linear gradient, and I added 90 degrees, so then they display vertically. We can also add multicolored radial gradients. As I did here, I added 3 colors, and before I added a circle. We can add transparency to our gradients by just dragging this bar, as I explained prior. We can add transparency, completely transparency for our last color, right? So in that case, in the circle, the second color is basically just transparent. And we can add gradient text instead of background colors. For that, we add the regular background linear gradient in the colors that you want, the direction first, but it is important to add background clip text and also color transparent. If you don't have these two, it's not going to work. And you might be wondering, what is this WebKit background clip? This is to render on a specific browser, but basically this is the same as background clip. All right, so you can see the gradient text effect, and you can custom, of course, the angle of the gradient by just using degrees, as I explained before. Okay, so let's explain now shadow. So I created 4 boxes. I call them all class. I added for all the class box, but for each I also included a box and a number. So I'm going to explain the regular shadow, inset, multiple, and spread. I added a comment for each, just for you to have it as a reference. Okay, so for my body, I added display flex, justified content center, align items center. I use viewport height as the height. I added margin of 0, font family, and background color white. I created a container for my boxes, and I added text align center, and for each box, the width of 200, same for the height, a background color, a linear gradient of pink and red, margin, displaying inline block, color font size, line height of 200 pixels, text align center, and a border radius of 10 pixels for my corners. For my first box, I added property box shadow, and I add 10 pixels for the X offset. For the Y, also 10 pixels, and 20 pixels for the blur radius. All right, so if I remove the 0, you can see that it removes the shadow on this side, correct? So remember, the first one is the X offset on the axis, second one Y offset, and the third one is for the blur radius. Now I choose the color of my box shadow, in this case a black, and it has an opacity that's 0.5. So usually we add an opacity to the box shadow because if we remove it, then it's gonna be too harsh. Right? And if we add 0, you can see the shadow also looks like, you can see the line of the shadow, right? It's too straight. So I mean, it's optional if you want to leave it like that, but now you can know how to make it blur in case you want it. Now we have the option to do an inset box shadow. So you can see that it has the same values as before, but we added the word inset prior. So then the shadow will be placed inside the box. So 10, 10, and the blur of 20. We also added the same color and opacity for this box as well. For our third box, we added 2 shadows instead of 1. So we have first the black shadow, same as the first box, and we added a comma, right? And we added the second shadow. So you can see the numbers are negative, therefore goes here, both. And instead of 20 pixels for the blur, we added 10 pixels. And I added the color red for you to differentiate both. Now for the last box, we added an spread box shadow. So you notice here that we added 10 pixels at the end. So that makes the shadow looks deeper. So if I add, let's say, 30 pixels instead of 10, you can see it kind of looks like it's floating or something, right? So I think 30 is too much, that's why I added 10 pixels. So basically this effect, what it does is just increases the size of the shadow. Alright, so there you have the 4 examples of box shadows, a regular shadow, an inset, a multiple, and also an spread one. So I have created different boxes for each background property and value. So for all of them, I added the class background to add the same CSS rule, but inside class I also have a different class depending on the property. Okay, so I chose this image for the background image of all my boxes. So this is how you can add a background image for an element. Basically you add background image, URL, and if it's an internal file you add dot and forward slash, and it will show the file. So let me just do it again. You can see all the files inside your folder, so I'm going to pick this one. And if it's an external link, then you have to just copy and paste it here inside the quotes. Just make sure that it's that has a file extension like JPG or PNG, all right? I added also a color, a margin top, a width of 100% for all boxes, and a height of 300 pixels. Alright, so let's explore the first property, which is background repeat. So we have 2 options, background repeat or no repeat. So you can see here, the image is displayed, then it will display it again, okay? So remember that always, all the elements by default float on the left side of the page, always. So you can see the font is here, and also the image starts from here, from the left, right? And we have here the background no repeat that only displays the image once. Okay, let's move on with the property background size. So for background size, we have 3 options. We have the background size value cover, contain, or we can add the width and the height that we want for the image. So for the first one, which is background cover, what it does is just stretch the image across the elements. So in this case, 100%, right? For the contain, instead, what it does is display the entire height of the image and repeat the image. So as it shows here, the image will be contained within the element. And for the third option, I added a width of 50% for the image. That means half of the size, right? And the height is auto. Now let's explore the background property background position. So we can choose the background position value center. And as you can see, it displays on the center of the element the middle part of the image. And on the sides, it shows the right side of the center, which is this part, right? And the left side of the center. But if I added background position center and background repeat, no repeat, and then it will leave only the center and the middle of the image. Okay, and we also can position the image starting from the side that we want. For example, top left. let me change it for top right, because top left is basically the default. So as you can see, it's the same as the first one. But if I change it for top right, then it will start from the right side of the element. And then it will repeat on the left side again the image. And as a second option, we can do as well, starting from the bottom right. So as it says here, the image will be placed at the bottom right corner. All right, so now we have the property background attachment. So we have two options, basically background attachment fixed or background attachment scroll. And this one is the default one. All of the boxes that we added before are by default background attachment scroll. That means the image scroll with the page, right? But we can choose background fixed. And then when I move my mouse, you can see the image displays depending on the position of my scroll bar, right? So that means the image is fixed. And this one is the default one, which is background scroll. And at the end, we have the property background color and also a property background blend mode. So it is important that you add both if you want to add some type of opacity to your background image. For example, if I want to add a title on top of my image and I want my image to be a little darker, like is here, then I add black and I add it. Then I add background color and I add black with 0.5 of opacity, but then I add background blend mode multiply. So the image will blend with the background color, because if I don't add this, then the background color won't apply. All right, so let's talk about text properties. For each property, I created a heading and also examples inside the p tag. And I added my internal CSS, added for my body, the font family, line height, and a margin. For this main heading, I added text align, color, text transform, and text decoration, and a letter spacing. That, of course, we're going to explore later on with examples. For my p tags, I added color, text align, text transform, text decoration, and word spacing, and also line height. All right, so the first property that we have is the text color. All right, so the color property in CSS defines the color of the text. It can be set using name colors, hex, RGB, or HSL values. For example, this text is red using the color red property, and this text is blue using the color number symbol 00F properties, which is a blue, right? Now we have the text alignment. The text align property sets the horizontal alignment of text within an element. Common values include left, right, center, and justify. So as you can see, this text is centered using text align center, and this text is aligned to the right using text align right. All right? Okay, so now we have text decoration. So text decoration property is used to set the decoration of the text. It includes options like none, underline, overline, and line through. This text has no decoration. This is the default. All right, so this is the default. Usually the text has no decoration unless it's a link. Right? Now this text is underlined. We choose the value text decoration underline, and this one is the text that has a line through it. So then we chose the value line through. Okay, so let's go to text decoration, right? And let me add here below P a link, right? We use the a tag for a link. Let me just add here link. You can see the links by default have an underline, so that's why you have to choose a text decoration none, and then it will remove the underline. Okay, so let's explore text transform. So text transform property controls the capitalization of text. It includes options like uppercase, lowercase, case, and capitalize. So for this test, we chose the option text transform uppercase, for this one lowercase, and for this one capitalized. So you can see here all the values that we added, right? Now let's talk about text spacing. So in CSS, the text spacing can be controlled using the letter spacing and word spacing properties. These properties define the space between letters and words. All right, so we have here the letter spacing example and the word spacing example. So let's check it out. We use letter spacing 3 pixels, right? So you can see the space between them. And for word spacing, we chose 8 pixels for each, okay? So we can go back and see that we chose a line height for our entire body content, correct? So line height is basically the space between the lines. So if I don't add line height, you can see it removed the space, right? But if I remove it also between the p tags, then it will have the regular line height. All right, so let's just put it back so you can see the difference now. We can also choose text align justify instead of text align center. So it will spread the text around the box. So let me make here below an example with Lauren. Lauren is just a dummy text. Justify text. Let's put it here. And here. Text align justify. Right? But if I added center, then it will gather all the text in the center. Okay, so let's go with the font properties in CSS. So we have font family that specifies the typeface for the text. There are generic families in CSS like sans serif, Arial, Times, New Roman, and so on. This is an example of the text with the font family of Courier New. Next, we have the font size that sets the size of the text. You can use units like pixels, EM, EMS, REMS, percentages for the text. So here we have 12 pixels for this one and 24 pixels for this text. Then we have the property font weight that defines the thickness of the text. 100 is thin and 900 is bold. You can also add a value like normal, bold, lighter, and bolder. So you can see 2 examples. For this one, we added 300 for the font weight, and for this one, 700. Now the next property is font style that allows you to choose between normal, italic, and oblique. So this is an example of italic, and this is a normal text. We also have the font variant. So enables you to display the text in a small caps font where lowercase letters appear as smaller uppercase letters. Example, this text is normal and this text is a small caps. You can see the value here, small caps. Okay guys, so I'm going to explain how to add a different font for your website with Google Fonts. Google Fonts have multiple options of fonts. I'm going to remove what I have already here. So you just type fonts or Google Fonts, and after you go here where it says fonts, you can search for the fonts if you know the name of it. Otherwise, you can just scroll down and check out all the options that you have. So let's say that I want to add this one. I click on it. I go to Get Font. I click on Get Embed Code. So I click here on Import. That's the way I add it. And I copy this part inside the style. And then I add it on the top of my style tag. If you have an external sheet, you just add it the first thing before any CSS. And then for the font family, I'm going to change it for this one. Okay, So when I switch it here, then you can see that I changed the font of the entire document, right? And let me just add it for one simple part. So let me see for, maybe for this one, the font Arial normal only. Okay. So if I want to add a regular symbol, I can search here on this website, W3 Schools, or I can go and ask maybe ChatGPT to give me the code of the symbol that I want. But let's say that I want to add this symbol, right? So then I just need to add this code to get this symbol for my HTML, right? So if I copy this here, and if I paste it here, then you can see the symbol is added. So this is how simple you can add any of the symbols that you want. You just have to get the code and then it will be added automatically on the HTML. Now, if I want an icon, I can use Font Awesome, which is one of the most popular. It's free if you add your email here when it starts for free. It's going to ask your email, and after you click on Send Kids Embed Code. So then it's going to give you something like this script that you have to paste here inside the head tag. And then you go there and choose in icons the icon that you want. So let's say that we want a candy, right? So if you want the free option, you just check for the one that does not say Pro. Let's say I want this one, so I click on it and I hover on it and it says copy code snippet, right? So then I go here and below I just add the code of the icon. Then when I reload, you can see that we have the icon that we just added. Let me add here, candy icon from Font Awesome. Okay. You can change the color of the candy just by adding here the I. That is the number of the tag. That is the name of the tag. And let's say, I think it's background color. Let's say background color red, right? Okay, so it was color. It depends on the icon, but in this case it's color. So let's just reload, and you can see that now the candy is red. You can also change it the size with font size, say 20 pixels, right? So then it applied the size for the icon. Okay, so on this video I'm going to explain to you the property overflow with the different values. So I created an HTML file with 4 different boxes. Each of the boxes have a different value for the property overflow. And inside the box, there is the explanation for each. Okay, so for each box, I call it a container, and I added a width and a margin, a padding, a border, and a background color. So let's start with overflow visible. All right, so overflow visible makes visible the entire content of the box. So this content overflows the container and it is fully visible outside of it. There are no scroll bars and content is not clipped, causing it to extend beyond the box boundaries. So you can see that even if our text is bigger than the height of the box, it will still show it, right? And this is because we're choosing overflow visible. So if we remove overflow visible, as you can see, it stays the same. And this is because by default, our box content is gonna be visible no matter what, no matter if we added overflow visible or not. In any case, it's gonna still be visible, all right? Okay, so let's continue with the overflow hidden. So this one is the completely opposite of visible. It's going to hide whatever is outside of our element. So let's go here and read. It says this content overflows the container, but it is hidden beyond the box boundaries. No scroll bars are shown, and the excess content is clipped or hidden. All right, so if the height is 100%, that is the height that I added for the second one, then it's going to hide whatever is after the 100 pixels of height. Okay, so as you can see, it's going to hide the rest of the text. Now we have the overflow scroll. So for this one, it's going to have our scroll bars on the right side and horizontally as well. But I wanted to show you that even if the height is 160, that means that you can see the entire content. Still, you can notice that it has the scroll bar arrows, right? They want to go up and down. Even if we click, nothing happens, right? And this is because it always going to show the scroll bar. So if I go and I added 100, then my scroll bars are going to allow me to see the entire content when I scroll down, correct? And if the width is smaller, it's gonna allow the horizontal ones. Let's say if I add here the width 100, right? On that case, the horizontal ones are going to be the one that allows me to see the rest, or just to scroll horizontally, okay? But in any case, as I said, if you can still see the entire content, always the scroll bars are going to be there. And now we have overflow auto, and this is the opposite of the before. So of the overflow scroll, that means that the scroll bars are only shown when it's needed. So as it says here, this content overflows the container, and the scroll bars appear only if the content overflows. If the content fits within the box, like it is here, no scroll bars are shown. So if I go and press 100 and change it for 100, then the scroll bar is going to appear, right? Alright, so then we have here our HTML file for the units example. So I'm going to explain about the different type of units that you can use on CSS. We have pixels, percentages, we have EM, also we have REM, and we have viewport height or viewport width. Alright, so I created, as always, boxes for each values. So let's go and explain each of them. But before, I created I added the class of the boxes as container. So for container, I added a padding of 10 pixels, a border, a margin of 5 pixels, just to see the difference between them, and that's it. So for each of them, I added different width and height depending on the value, okay? And inside the boxes, there is a p tag with the explanation for each. Alright, so the first unit is pixels. So this one is the most common. I created this first box by adding a width of 300 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. So no matter the size of the window, it will remain the same size, 300 by 200. So the width is set to 300 pixels and the height is set to 200 pixels. Pixels are absolute units that don't scale with the viewport or text size changes. Okay. Then we're gonna move on with percentages. So I added 50% for the width and same as the height, 50%. So the width is set to 50% of the parent container's width. Percentages are relative to the size of the parent element. Alright, so on this case, the parent is body, right? So we can see it here, right? Inside the body, we have all our div tags. That means the div are the children and body is the parent. So then what it's going to take is that this box, so what happens is that this box has 50% of the width of the body. Alright, so that's why it goes till the middle. So you notice that I also added a height of 50%. and it's not taking 50% of the body. And this is because, as I added here as a comment, if the pattern on this file, the pattern is body, has no height property, the height in percentage of the element is auto. So this is to keep in mind for the percentages. Now the next one is the EM. So the width for this box is in EM. So the width is set to 30 EM, which means 30 times the element's font size, 14 pixels in this case, making it 420 pixels. And the height is 7 EM. That means 98. 7 by 14 is 98. All right, so basically EM is the font size of the element. So in case we don't add any font size, let's say for this box, what is going to happen is it's going to take the height of the default font size. So in the beginning we didn't add any font size for our body. Then by default it's going to be 16. Okay, so only it's going to apply. So it's going to apply either the default size, or if you added a font size inside the element, it's going to take the size of the font size as a reference. Okay, all right, so now REM is the font size of the root. So in this case, if we added a font size, let's set to body. Let me add it to body so we can have more understanding. So if we add it for body, font size, let's say 20 pixels, let's say 17 pixels, right? Then it's gonna apply the 20 REM. It's gonna be 20 by 17 pixels. And you can see that the size of the font size is bigger. So 20 plus 17 is gonna be 340. Here, and if the height is 8 REM, so by 17 is 136. All right, so keep that in mind that it is EM. It takes as a reference the font size of the element, and REM, it takes the font size of the root. So in this case, the body, in case it has a font size inside the body, or 16 pixels, because that is the font size that is set by default. Alright, so now let's move on with the viewport height. So for the viewport height, we added a width of 400 pixels, and the height of the viewport height, we added 50 viewport height. Alright, so 50, and I change it here, this should be 50. 50 viewport height is basically 50% of the viewport height. So you can see that the viewport height is basically when I move my scroll bar, right? Whatever I have on my screen, so all of what I'm seeing right now, that's my viewport, right? So if I say viewport height 50%, then it is the half of the height of my viewport, you know? So this is 50, and we'll have 50% also as well. So it's not the height of the entire body, it's the height of my viewport, all right? And the same goes for my viewport width. That is the next box. So as you can see, when I expand my window, it will take, you can see more clearly that it's taking the 50% of the viewport. All right, so that's 50 viewport width, is the 50% of the viewport's width. All right, so let's continue with media queries and just responsiveness in general. So media queries are a crucial feature in CSS for creating responsive designs that adapt to different screen sizes and devices. A media query consists of a media type and one or more expressions that check the conditions of the device or viewport. When the conditions are met, the associated CSS rules are applied. So this is basically a syntax of a media query. So it's add media. We added a media type that is optional and the condition. And inside we apply the CSS rules. Alright, so let's check the viewport size key points. So the viewport size is defined by the visible area within the browser window, influenced by screen size, browser window size, and zoom level. So high resolution allows more content to be displayed, affecting the viewport size. Physical size in inches doesn't directly determine the viewport size, but the resolution does. Monitors of different sizes but the same resolution will have the same viewport size. And resizing the browser window reduces the viewport size compared to the full screen. Alright, so I created a container that has a width of 100%, a border, 2 pixels, solid and gray, color white, text align center. And also for my container, I added a default style, so I added a font size and a background color of light blue. Now, I wanted my container, I wanted changes the background color and the font size, and for this part, also the border, depending on the size of my screen. Alright, so for that, I use media queries, as you can see, and this is the background color and the font size when it doesn't have any of this rules applied, any of the media queries. But when it has a specific one, then it's going to change the CSS rules, right? Okay, so this is my HTML file. So if I expand it, you can see that it adjusts depending on the size of the screen. So media queries is helpful because if we want to adjust the entire content of our website depending on the device, let's say a phone or an iPad, we can make as many adjustments as we want using media queries, right? So if we want to change the size of an image, of the text, of a slider, anything. So anything that is part of our website that we want to adjust depending on the device or the screen size, we can do it with media queries. That's why it's very important to understand this topic. Alright, so to know how this contour is going to look depending on the device, I can go on my Windows with Ctrl-Shift-I, and it will take me to the Web Developer Tools, or I can just go and go here on the right side where it says More Tools, and I go to Developer Tools. Alright guys, so I'm going to start with an iPhone. You can see here there is a different type of devices. I'm going to choose this one, the iPhone, right? And I can just make the screen smaller, right? So we can see that we added media and max width 500 pixels, right? So I mean for the font size, the background color is going to change to this red color, reddish, and the font size also is going to be 14 pixels. It's not going to be 16 pixels anymore, but it's going to be 14 pixels. But now let's see what happens if I change it for, let's say, iPad Pro. Then, as we notice, it turns into green. And the reason why is because from 800 pixels of width, such as the minimum width, is going to change the background color and the font size, right? So let me switch this for more, maybe a yellow one, because we want to see also a difference for landscape. So if I go back and font, and what I do is I change for landscape, right? The orientation, then it changes to this CSR rule. And actually I realized that I changed the color, but no. Alright, the color of the border and not the background color. So you can see that now that I switched to landscape, right? The orientation, then it's going to apply these CSS rules, right? And if I go to 600, so let me put it back normal. And let's say I change it for, I'm going to choose responsive so I can move it anywhere I want. So if I go to 600 or 554, no 600 but 554, you can see that now it's blue, such is the initial one. So why is it blue? Is because it's wider than 600, is wider than 500, but it's less than 800, right? So it's between 500 and 800, then it's going to go back to the normal background color and font size that I added in the beginning. Now let's continue with transitions in CSS. So I created 6 different type of boxes that have different values for the property transition. So for all of them I added a class box, and inside the class I added different class name depending on the value. Alright, so for each box I added padding, the width automatic, border radius 0, text align, center for the font, a background color of this turquoise, cursor pointer, so when I go hover on them it shows this hand, and I added a transition delay of 0 and a transition duration of 2 seconds. This is because I want you to see the difference of the transition timing function. So if I add a different duration for all of them, you're not going to be able to see clearly the timing function value. All right, but just remember that you can add a transition duration of any time that you want. You can add in seconds or milliseconds. All right, so if I added here ms, that means milliseconds. All right, you can add any transition delay starting from 0 till any seconds that you want, or milliseconds. All right, so let me start with the first box that has the transition timing function linear. All right, so a transition linear maintains a constant speed throughout the entire duration. And remember, the transition is going to apply only when the box is hovered. That means when I have the cursor on top of the box. Then it's going to apply this background color blue, the color of the font black, and the border radius is going to change for 8 pixels. All right, so let's see the transition timing function linear when we hover on the first box. All right, so when you go out and when we go in is smooth, right? So the linear maintains a constant speed throughout the entire duration. All right, so let's move on with the cubic Vizier. So for the cubic Vizier, we can adjust the speed at the beginning and at the end, but also in the middle of the transition. So here I added 1,001. So begins at full speed immediately and ends abruptly at full speed. So you see it's very fast in the beginning, but also when I'm not hovering, right? So in the beginning and at the end is fast. All right, so for cubic Vizier, you can have other options. So if you just remove it here, you can see that it gives you a couple of options for this cubic Vizier. So all of them have different effects for the transitions. All right, so one of the most famous one is the transition is. So it starts slow, it speed ups in the middle, and then it slows down towards the end. right? So we can see it. Now we have the is in, that is starts slows and it speeds up towards the end. You see, it slowly goes and after is faster, right? And this out is the opposite. It starts fast and it slows down towards the end. You see, it's more slow at the end, and this one is more slow in the beginning. And the last one is easing out. So it starts slow, it speeds up in the middle, and it slows down again at the end. So this is kinda similar to the is, right? As you can see, it starts slow as well, it speeds up in the middle, and it slows towards the end. So it can be similar to the is as well. Okay, so now if I have different transitions that I want to add, I can choose also transition property and choose, on this case, let's say background color, right? And if I want to add all of them in just one property, then I use transition. So basically I can add transition all if I want to apply for all of my properties. The duration, so let's say 2 seconds. The timing function, so in this case would be linear. And also the delay, so I can add just 0 seconds. So remember, the order is property, duration, timing function, and delay. Alright, let's learn about transform, the transform property values. So I created different boxes for each. Added padding, a width of auto, and a margin of 50 pixels, and text align center. So let's start with the first one. Alright, so the first one is translate, so basically it moves the box around. The first 20 pixels represents the x-axis, and the last one on the y-axis. So we are saying move it 20 pixels on the right and 20 pixels down. Alright, so if we add negatives, then it's going to go the first one to the left, and the second one is going to move up, okay? So basically horizontally and vertically. Now for the second one, now for my second box, which is the value scale, added 1.5, that means increases the size by 50%. And this is because by default the scale is 1. So if I remove this and I added just 1, this is going to be the default size, right? So if I remove this as well, it's going to remain the same. So remember, the scale by default is 1, and then we can add here the size that we want, either 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever size, and it will increase or decrease the size. The third value is rotate, so transform rotate 45 degrees, so this is going to rotate in one dimension, right? So here I added 45 degrees, therefore it's gonna go up, okay? Up and right, diagonal. Then we have the skew value. So the skew moves the box in 2 dimensions. We added 20 degrees on the x-axis and 10 degrees on the y-axis, but 2D instead of 1D. Now we have matrix that is basically a combination of the skew, scale, and translate. So this is a bit more complicated and more complex than the other ones. With that, we can move the box around in different directions and different parts of the axis. Now we have the translate x. So basically it translates on the x-axis, 30 pixels, that means to the right. And translate y, then it moves it on the y-axis, and I added minus 30 pixels, so that means it's going to go up. We can also choose a scale X, so a scale on the X-axis, that means the width, the X-axis, so that means the width is going to be double. For the scale Y, that is the Y-axis, we added a height of 0.5, scale Y, that means it's going to reduce it in half, the height. Rotate X for the to rotate 45 degrees on the X-axis, and rotate Y to rotate 45 degrees on the Y-axis, but don't confuse it with translate, because remember that translate is 1D and rotate is 2D, okay? And then at the end we have perspective. So if we remove the perspective and only use rotate X 45 degrees, right? So in the 2 dimensions, it's going to move it, right? It's going to move it 45 degrees, but with that perspective, we are adding 200 pixels. So then the bottom part, it will increase 200 pixels to create the effect that it's falling, and when it's falling the box, then the bottom part is going to look bigger because it's closer to us, right? And the top is farther, then it's going to be smaller. So we can create this effect with perspective. And the last one is rotate 3D. So basically we can rotate the box in 3 dimensions. And for this case, we added 110 and 70 degrees. So then it's going to transform 70 degrees, but it's going to transform diagonally, all right? Okay, so then we have animations. I created 6 different types of animations for the 6 boxes and created a different animation for each. So for that, we're going to use keyframes. That is going to allow us to add rules for our animations, CSS rules for our animations, okay? Add some properties and values for all of my boxes. I also added a transition for all the animations, 0.3 seconds, and the timing function of is. So all of the transitions are going to be smooth, all right? So for the first box, we added, and by the way, for all of them, the animation is going to apply only if we hover on them. So you can see that right now, none of them have any animation, but when we hover on them, then the animation is going to start. So I added first the name of my animation, so I call it bounce. I added a duration of 2 seconds, timing function of is, and I added infinite as the iteration count, all right? So iteration count is how many times I want my animation to display, basically. And I want it to be infinite. Now for the animation direction, I added alternate, so that means between reverse and non-reverse. And the animation play state is paused. So you can see here that I also added inside bounds that from 0% to 100% is going to translate y0, but when it reaches the 50%, it's going to translate y minus 30 pixels, all right? So if I hover on them, let me add cursor pointer here that I thought I added, but I didn't. So if I hover on them, you can see that nothing happens, and this is because I have the play state on post, okay? So if I change it for running and I reload, then the animation is going to start. So remember, you can add it running or post. And then you can see that it's bouncing, but the direction is alternate, which is reverse or non-reverse. So here, you can see that we can choose reverse or normal. Right, so if I choose normal, then you can see the effect is different than before, right? So it starts from 0, it goes up minus 30 pixels, right, vertically, and it goes down again when it reaches 100, so it will be 0. That means as it was in the beginning. So this is the bounce effect that we can add for this animation. Remember, the percentage is the 0% is when it starts, 100% when it finishes, and in this case 50% will be in the middle, right? We can add 20, 10%, and whatever between 0 and 100%. Alright, so for the second one we have the spin. So we added 3 seconds for the duration, linear and infinite, so it's not going to stop. But here we added iteration count 2, so let me add it 1 and remove this one, the infinite. So then you can notice that only is going to happen once, and then it's going to stop. So if I added 2, 3, 4, 5, then we are adding the times that we want our animation to work, to play. So what I'm adding here is a 0% of rotation at the beginning and a 360 when it reaches 100%. It means when it reaches the end of the 3 seconds. Now here for the pulse, we added the scale 1 and the scale 1.2 when it reaches the middle of our animation, such as 50%. We call it pulse, then after keyframes we added pulse, right? Remember that we have to add the same name of the animation here after keyframes. Added the timing function, inside, in, out, and infinite. So then it's going to increase, decrease, increase, and decrease. Okay, forever. For the fourth one, we added a linear timing function, 4 seconds duration, infinite. And what we want to do is to change the background color. So then when it reaches 50%, turns purple, and after it will go to the initial color, such as a yellow one. Very simple animation. The next one is the flip one. Let me add timing function of 3, an iteration count of 3. So 1, 2, and 3, right? So we are adding a flipping animation. So flip 2 seconds is seen in 3 iteration counts. So from the start till the end, the rotation will be 0, but when it reaches the middle, please rotate 180 degrees, right? And of course vertically, because it's rotate Y. And for the last one, we added a very simple one, fade in, fade out. So just it's going to have a duration of 4 seconds, and the opacity is going to be 0 initially, until the end is going to be 0, but in the middle the opacity is going to be 1. And if you're wondering why in the beginning it's not 0%, it's because if we don't add an opacity here, then automatically it's going to be 1. So if I add here opacity 0, right, then the opacity is going to be 0 from the beginning. So even if it's 0% here, remember that it also has to be 0 for the rule of my element. Okay, because this is the state, because this is the state of the animation. So 0% is from the beginning of the animation. All right? So that has to be clear. So it's very important for you to remember that.